Internet architecture. The idea of building a network which is going to reach out around the world means that we have to deploy the same type of control mechanisms as we do with a normal house or office building. That is, we often build in layers of defense. The idea of a layered defense model is that we could have then defense out of the perimeter of our building with a fence. We have then the main door, and the main door provides access into, say, a semi-public area, such as the lobby. In the lobby, we have additional defense with, say, security guards and maybe man traps or turnstiles that then restrict access to the trusted internal part of the organization. And we do the same thing with the internet. If we're going to go out and provide a web application that can be accessed from anywhere in the world, we then build that in behind layers of defense. Maybe we put in, for example, a packet filtering router as a firewall as a first layer of defense. Then maybe a web application firewall in behind that. And behind that, then the actual host that the application itself is running on. We could call that a screened host because the host has been screened by multiple layers of protection in front of it. We also can, at the point where we're dividing traffic from one network to another, put in what we'll call a dual-homed host. A dual-homed host is a host then that has several network interface cards or NIC cards. And one of those cards could be connected to the internet connection. The other card is then facing our internal network. The idea of the dual-homed host is that it provides a separation between those two networks. We can then examine any traffic that's going to go through so that we can make sure that something from the outside does not have unlimited access to the inside. We then separate these networks with an air gap, for example. We often also use the idea of a DMZ or DMZ, a demilitarized zone. A demilitarized zone is a semi-trusted area. It's like the front lobby of your office building. Many people can come in there, and that's a place where we can meet with them, and we might have a conference room there. We can sit and chat with them, but they don't actually get access to the internal building in behind. And that's exactly what we do with a lot of our network architectures. We then can provide an area for commerce, an area that we can communicate with untrusted or semi-trusted people. And that area is then, it's often called, it's not really a good term, but it's called a DMZ or DMZ, demilitarized zone. And the idea of that is that's an area where we can meet and converse, but it is isolated so that that untrusted person, which is in the DMZ, is not able to gain access to maybe the protected resources inside the rest of the building. What we've really done is we've set up an isolated network on which our public-facing servers will actually operate. You also have the term an extranet, which can come in with this. And an extranet is almost like a special type of a DMZ. An extranet is also a place then for interface between the outside untrusted and the inside trusted areas. We set up a separate network, or you could call it a DMZ. And the difference is that anybody can go to our web application. Our web applications and our primary DMZ and anybody in the world can go there. But the extranet is still an external facing subnet, small network, but very often requires additional authentication. An extranet is for business partners and trusted people that can come in and exchange information with us. It's really a more hardened DMZ, if you want to call it that. We use firewalls to do a lot of this work for us. Quite often our firewall will have then one port going off towards, for example, our DMZ, another port that's facing towards the internet, and another port facing to our internal network, and sometimes even a fourth port facing towards an extranet. The firewall is that point where we manage all of that. The problem is that sometimes we consider a firewall can do more than it really can. For example, a network layer firewall is not going to protect us against an application level attack. In some cases, a person can think, well, I have a firewall, so therefore I'm secure. No, a firewall is just one of the tools we use, and it must be used and configured properly. The problem for many organizations today is the firewalls can easily be bypassed. For example, we might have a firewall that faces from our internal network out to the internet. But somebody within the company goes and plugs a wireless access point into the internal network. That allows someone from outside to be able to gain access to that wireless access point and circumvent the firewall. The other problem is that very often we find firewalls are misconfigured. They're not set up correctly, and so therefore they'll let through traffic that really should not have been allowed through. Firewalls allow us to track and monitor traffic, but just to have a log does not protect us. It's necessary that we have people that review those logs, people that check to see what types of activity, are there certain types of problems. And this is where we often see that firewall logs have not been monitored. The result of that has been that in some cases, an attack has actually gone on for a long time, but because nobody was monitoring, then that attack was able to continue, where it should have been shut down immediately because the evidence of the attack was in the logs. And firewalls are limited. Sometimes if the traffic coming through the firewall is encrypted, the firewall is not going to be able to see the actual attack. Or if we've got a problem with the firewall is not able to do inspection of certain types of protocols or non-standard protocols, it might not even detect an attack that's going on. Another important part of then our network architecture is to implement then intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems. These very often are similar types of systems. In fact, quite often you can buy a network appliance that will do either detection and or prevention. And IDSs can be hardware-based, software-based. They could also be based on a network where they're watching network traffic, or they can be right on a host where they're protecting that specific host. An example of a network-based IDS is where we actually have a person who sits and watches all of the traffic that goes down the road. Now that person can log it and record what traffic went down the road, how many cars, trucks, and buses. But in many cases, they can't do anything about it. They just have a record of it. And that's truly an intrusion detection system. Intrusion prevention would be where we have a policeman standing in the middle of the road, and if any traffic comes that that policeman doesn't like or doesn't fit within the rules, he'll then prevent or stop that traffic. Well, the idea in both cases is we are providing network monitoring. And the question, of course, is, are we going to actively prevent then something we don't like, or are we just going to log it through an intrusion detection system? A host-based IDS is one that picks up a change on a host. For example, we've had a change in an application. A host-based IDS will say, hey, this application has changed. Is that proper? Do we maybe have an unauthorized change? And this is something we often see after patches have come out. All of a sudden, a number of our applications will say, hey, wait a second, this has changed. Well, again, it's a host-based intrusion detection. It's picked up a change that's already happened. Well, it's good to know that that change has happened. But you are all familiar today with how effective many of our host-based IPSs are. And this is when you're, for example, going to do something. You want to download, say, an application and run that application, and up comes a little window, bloop, and that little window comes up and says, this is trying to make a change to your system. Do you want to allow it? And that's a host-based intrusion prevention system. It prevents that change until it's notified you that this change is going to take place and make sure that you have given your permission for it. The idea of IDSs and IPSs is that they are another layer of defense. So we have a firewall. That's our first line of defense. In behind that, we might put a network-based IDS and IPS. And then even in behind that, on each individual host, we'll put in a host-based IDS and IPS. The idea behind these is that traffic which one of them doesn't pick up, hopefully the next one will. The idea of a layered defense or a defense in depth model. Intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems can make their decisions based on known types of attacks. If we know that a certain type of attack has a certain format or signature, if you want to call it, we can tell the IDS to watch for this, and if you see that, that's bad. And a signature-based system is very accurate. If it turns around and says, this is something that you've told me is bad, then it's usually right. However, we know that an intrusion detection system which is only based on signatures is not then going to pick up a new type of attack for which we've not told it to watch for certain signatures. But the idea of signature-based systems often look for things like patterns, look for known types of, shall we say, traffic patterns and activity that they can, of course, then alert us to then there's something which is inappropriate in traffic. We also have then systems which look more at anomalies. And an anomaly is something which is something different from normal. Say, for example, we know there's a normal level of traffic. It's sort of like watching a tennis match. You see a ball go back and forth across the net. And you gain an appreciation of what is normal types of traffic. And all of a sudden you see 50 balls go across the net. Well, that's a statistical anomaly. You should only have one ball at a time. You see a flood of UDP traffic, a flood of ICMP traffic. And an IDS then will pick that up and say, that's not normal. That's different from the normal statistical characteristics of the traffic I'm used to. So it picks that up as an anomaly, and in the case of an IPS might block it, or an IDS at least log it and alert us to that type of an anomaly. We also have others that try to learn. These are heuristic scanners, sometimes called neural networks, and they watch the types of traffic we have and look for something that might be suspicious and are able to learn then whether or not this is good or bad by watching its behavior. So we don't yet have a signature. We don't have a true, should we say, statistical bias. And so therefore, we examine things and are able to learn good and bad by watching their behavior. And these are heuristic scanners. The IDS and the IPS record the traffic, either on a network or on a host. They can alert us to some types of problems and issues. And in some cases, an IDS will interface with a firewall and say, hey, you should reset that connection or drop that connection. But the problem with these, again, is that especially a network-based IDS and IPS, is that it's blind to encrypted traffic. If we have traffic which is encrypted, and then that IDS doesn't have the key, it's not going to be able to actually see that traffic and examine it properly. Now, a host-based IPS usually can, because at the host it's being decrypted and then it can examine it. But especially a network-based IDS and IPS is often kind of half-blind. Another type of defense we can use on our networks is to create a distraction for the hacker. A hacker is going to try to break into our network, and they're going to look for something of value, something of interest. And we give them something to look for. We give them something that glitters a little bit so that they see this and they rush off towards that. It's a decoy. It's a distraction. And the idea behind this is that the hacker, instead of then attacking what truly is of value, ends up attacking something that is really just a honeypot. A honeypot is where that diverts them over to that other area where there is nothing of value. It looks good, but has no true asset worth. And in that honeypot, we log the traffic. We watch the attack techniques. We watch where that traffic comes from. So the idea of a honeypot is it allows us now to learn more about the hacker. We can track the tools they use, and we can learn their behaviors.